Welcome to this episode of Revolution and Ideology. I'm Nick,
I'm Jared.
and this is a special episode because if I've done my math correctly, this is our 100th episode. Technically, I think it's actually the 101st episode because we published an episode ahead of this one that we hadn't intended. But, anyways, we've reached a milestone nonetheless that we have knocked out 100 episodes on our podcast.
We hear you all cheering
Now,
in the background.
yeah, for sure. Our YouTube channel has many more videos on it because we have all kinds of other content on there that we had before we started doing the actual podcast. But the official podcast with Revolution and Ideology and the Myth is America series combined, we have got over 100 episodes now. So yeah, we just wanted to do an episode to talk about, sort of reminisce about our time as a podcast and talk about how we feel, where we are and where we're going, and what we have in mind and in store for the program. My first question is for you: is what is your favorite episode?
I mean, there's a lot to go through. I was actually just scrolling through them at this point. I mean, like I said, 100 different episodes. I don't know. There's a lot. So here, we'll start with let's start with this. We'll go with what appears to be all of your favorite episodes based on just like count and watch time and things along those lines. So the first one that kind of
Meaning like
struck
the listeners.
the listeners, excuse me, the listeners slash viewers, like what was your
Okay.
guys' favorite like episode? So first one we have to just give like a weird shout out to, even though it's not really your favorite, but we did a film review of a great Netflix film called The Platform. And I don't know how many views that got to before we actually took it off the channel, but it was nearing, I think, 100K at some point. Maybe I'm actually overestimating. I don't know. Nick, do you have the numbers? Because I don't have it up
I
right this
know, but
second.
it was. I think it did get 100K.
But here's the giant caveat to that. I honestly, whatever, a little bit of ego here. I think we did a pretty good job breaking down that film.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the big caveat: most of the people that were clicking and watching that were actually hoping just to get a free version of the movie. I think is what that was. So
Yep.
we kind of removed that, and now let's talk about like what all of your favorite
So it
episodes were
got
based.
83,000 views.
It got 83K. Okay, before we actually took it down. Okay.
Yep.
All right. In terms of what your guys' favorite episode is, it was actually one of Nick's standalone that he originally made for class. So it's not even a podcast episode. It was just a video that he made for a class for one of his sociology classes about Antonio Gramsci. So we have to give a shout out there too.
Mm-hmm.
Any commentary since that was a solo project by you?
I don't. I'm actually shocked that at how popular that episode is. We just hit like all things came together, the right like weird niche that like there wasn't a lot of content on Gramsci, and for some reason I have no idea why that one's as successful as it is, but yeah, it gets a lot of views. Probably like the listeners of the podcast, that's not their favorite, but it gets a lot of views on YouTube. People searching hegemony and trying to figure out about
Right.
Gramsci's ideas for sure.
In terms of other popular videos, and these are off the top of my head, even though I technically could pull up the analytics right this second, whatever, I'm not doing it. So off the top of my head, I do know that my episode doing the history of the Zapatistas has been
Mm-hmm.
pretty popular. I do know that Nick's discussion of Frere is actually popular. Not all of Paulo Frere, but like just what is it? Why am I
False
blanking this?
generosity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
False generosity has been very popular. We do know that one of the episodes where I go through like an intense, deep 2 episode history of the Kurds is pretty
Mm-hmm.
popular. Transatlantic slave trade has been pretty popular. At least the first episode. I guess we offend enough people they don't watch the second one. Um, and what else we got in there? Scientific racism has been pretty good. So those are off the top of my head some of our more popular videos, at least in terms of like what listeners and viewers seem to think.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of my personal favorites, though, all of those actually qualify. I think I like all those episodes as well. But there's a couple that flew under the radar, and if you haven't listened or viewed them, you should go back and check them out. We do a 2-part episode on the United States War for Independence. Not any of the battles or strategies or any of that stuff, but more like the underlying causes of the war and the hypocrisy, actually, of the architects of the United States in regards to how they kind of frame why they're going to war and then what happens after the war. I think that was actually a super underrated episode. I think what happens is in the YouTube algorithm, people search like U.S. War for Independence or American Revolution or whatever. And yes, at that point, we are competing with some of the big big history channels, right? Like those huge history channels, and no
Yeah,
one's going
for
to click
sure.
on our cute little like whatever our little channel to watch us ramble on for an hour of something they can watch on Crash Course in like whatever it is, 11 to 13 minutes or whatever he runs those at. But
Hmm.
ours is nothing like that. Ours obviously discusses, of course, like the difference between taxation without representation or versus the British argument of virtual representation. We talk about how ludicrous it actually was to be protesting taxation, especially after the British had literally just won a war for the colonists to open up the Ohio Valley, and they had actually dumped all their resources into it. So they didn't just wake up one day, roll out of bed, and say, "Yeah, we feel like oppressing the colonists." No, the colonists asked for this war, then they asked for additional protection from indigenous rebellions such as Pontiacs, and all of that cost money. So the British were actually within their right regarding like taxing and things like that. Anyway, we go through that entire history. We talk about the Daughters of Liberty, which are obviously are usually overlooked in history. So I never understood why that one never actually took off. I think it's actually a pretty good episode.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's just what you said. Like we're competing with so many others, like the Crash Courses, etc. It has been so done to death. I think probably not done from the same angle that we approach it with, clearly. But yeah, no one's looking.
Zoroastrianism was actually a popular episode that we didn't think was going to get popular. Maybe it's just like you said with Gramsci. There's just not a lot of content on YouTube
Hmm.
about it, so that one actually is pretty good, and that's also a personal favorite because I like talking about some of these philosophical slash quasi metaphysical topics. We went through a phase there with Sufism and Buddhism as well, and we even had, of course, the episode that is somewhat controversial to evangelicals, like Jesus was a revolutionary until Constantine screwed it up. That's actually a fun episode. It's not even that the episode's that fun.
Hmm.
It's fun reading the comments on that one. I love the commenters like, "Oh my god," like heresy. But anyway, so yeah, those are a few that jump out to me. I don't want to talk
Yeah.
all day. What do you? Where are you at? What are some of your favorites, Nick?
I like the Myth is America series that we did, and I guess are still doing. Though we haven't done a lot of episodes in that sort of thread lately, but there's a lot of them in there that I really really liked that we had fun doing. So there's a lot of cool like sound bites that I think are just hilarious from when we first started that series. Like you had a quote that was like Columbus and his big ass Cadillac of a boat or something like that.
That was your quote,
Like
I
so,
think.
there's no, it was you for sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so just something like that. Like those are the funnest I think to record and like just talk about those topics. So those are really good. Then I like the ones that we collaborated with other people. So our student Dante, we have to give a shout out to him. He came on when we were talking about Sufism and anarchism, etc. He actually brought that topic to us and was interested in it, and so we did that one. We have one with our previous student and friend Alan, where we talked about Lysander Spooner and sort of his thoughts on the Constitution, which was an interesting one. Our previous student Gabe came on and we taught. That's what episode was that? When we
That was
talked
the
about
hunt.
the film The Hunt, yeah, which was a failure. No one watched that episode, but I thought it was funny. We were just like, let's watch this movie and talk about it, and it ended up being the movie itself was like interesting and hilarious and not very good, but then we
Yeah.
just had commentary on it, which I liked.
That was just
Um,
algorithm hunting after the platform
yeah,
blew up. We're like,
exactly.
hey, maybe we
Hmm.
can watch a couple of movies. Yeah, whatever. We're not movie reviewers.
The one on the social dilemma that we did is actually pretty good too.
Yeah.
Um, I like watching films and discussing them, but so there's just so much content out there on YouTube and podcast land of people doing that take it from different angles that we're not film critics clearly. We just think films are interesting and like watching them and talking about them. But I like those episodes. I think that that's in
Which
the
is
life.
possible for a future episode. I was watching one of those more famous film review slash like
Mhm.
critique channels the other day. I don't remember. Maybe it was the Critical Drinker or somebody about that. Like, I'm not trying to like whatever name drop at this point. At this point in the episode, but like one of the things that did get me thinking for a future episode is we kind of brainstorm in this hundredth episode of ours is there has been a lot of backlash in these film reviews that they are a little bit upset about the diminishing role of men in films, and there's been like a little bit of a backlash there, which I think is absolutely just laughable. Like representation is wildly important to, of course, I don't know, as we talk about in the ethically constitutive stories episode, to like kind of set the table for your values as a society. So to be blunt, what I'm seeing oftentimes in these like film critique channels or even video game critique channels is a lot of very sad white men and
Mm-hmm.
upset about them losing what status they have in the pop culture lithosphere, for lack of a better term. I think there's actually an episode there.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys think you'd like to hear us proverbially shit on some of these film theorists, we'd be happy to do an episode. So leave a comment. Let us know if that's something you're interested in. All right, keep going, Nick. Sorry.
Interesting. Let's talk about formats because we have like the long form, really more podcast type episodes, and then we have like the highly what do I want to call it? Summarized sort of short videos where it's like, 5 to 20 minutes, like Gramsci's an example, false generosity is an example. You did a really short one on like the ethically constitutive story, etc. And then we have like the long, like the Kurds is 4 hours, I think, of total content together. We did it in 2 episodes. So what's your favorite to do?
I like the long form, especially
Mm-hmm.
since we can kind of just like BS a little bit. There's a little bit more back and forth. It's less scripted. Obviously, I'm using like all of my historical research on mine, and you're using all your sociological research on yours. So yeah, there is like a generalized game plan, but it's less formal, and I like it. That's just definitely the way I
Mm-hmm.
like to speak, whether in class or in on YouTube or in a podcast. I just prefer it.
Yeah. It's also funny
Now,
because
in
people don't
terms
realize that like the shorter episodes require much, much, much more preparation because you have to be able to like get everything you want to say in 7 minutes, whatever the topic is, right? And that's really, really hard to do, at least for us. We are much more designed because we're educators to like talk for an hour about something or 2 hours about something in really, really detailed sort of a really detailed manner, I guess. So like I'm the same as you. I like the longer form ones, which play better on the podcast, but not as good on YouTube. The
right.
YouTube algorithm really rewards the shorter episodes. But in podcast land, I mean, the podcast listeners, I'm assuming, want the longer form stuff. Yeah, so we've gone all across the gamut from like 3 minute videos to 4 hours of content about a single topic. My favorite are the longer forms. I mean, 4 hours is getting a little long, but I think that one really warranted it, right? So, I mean, really, we picked the length based on whatever the topic we think it needs, right? So, we thought we could do an ethically constitutive story in 3 minutes and explain that topic. I could
Right.
do false generosity in however long that video is, 7 minutes or whatever. We didn't need an hour of us talking about it. But some things like the Cuban Revolution, we have no desire to try to do a 8 minute history of the Cuban Revolution, right? Like that's just way too hard and nuanced, and like you can't get across the history of that revolution in 8 minutes. And other people have already done it, right? You can search Crash Course Cuban Revolution or whatever and find a really, really good 10-minute video. We're not going to do that. We're going to give people the detail that they want from us about, like, as an example, the Cuban Revolution, right? So I think
Well,
that
and
we're
our
actually.
commentary, and to be blunt,
Mhm.
our biases, like those are things that are implemented. And of course, as educators, again, we're both like telling stories. And as Nick already asserted, like our training is basically to cover different blocks of time. I'm trained to talk for an hour and 15 minutes, or in longer form, sometimes like two and a half
Mhm.
hours. Like that. That's how we're trained. But here's the other key point: it's not even just kind of like lecture, it's more Socratic. And so that's where that back and forth comes in. So like whether I'm standing in front of a
Right.
classroom or I am in this sitting down on this couch and talking to Nick, like it's that back and forth, right? Like that Socratic methodology of getting across like this content, Cuban Revolution, Kurdish history, whatever it is we're talking about. And that's just more natural for us. And we're not faulting any of those channels that can somehow consolidate the Cuban Revolution or whatever other topic we're talking about into 8 to 11 minutes. But they're more trained to do that, to try and condense this information into a digestible format for the quick researcher or the student in high school doing a history project or whatever. That's fine. That's good for them. And that's what they do. I think that content is necessary. I don't think it has like the
Mhm.
depth or like explores like the ideological or material backgrounds of the events it's talking about, but it's not meant to. It's just like this happened and then this happened and then this happened and then this happened. And
Which I
it
think
is
is
what it is.
fine. Like those videos definitely have a place, right? I think
Right.
that's how people learn. Like, okay, I know nothing about this topic. Give me this general overview in 8 minutes, right? I think that's totally fine. And I hope that when they want more information, maybe they'll seek out our longer videos that have much more detail and nuance and a much more like, holistic overview of whatever the topic happens to be. That's fine. You know what I mean?
I
But
mean,
the
it's just
longer
this.
videos will never be as popular as the shorter videos. That's just not going to happen.
No, and even in our longer videos, we can look at the view time, and not that many people are getting through the whole thing anyway. But like again, that speaks to a couple of things. A, how busy everyone is in their lives. And B, I hate to say it, but like shorter attention spans, the
Mm-hmm.
inability to concentrate on anything for extended periods of time. Like, and again, this is not necessarily a critique of those individuals, but more the society that has produced individuals whose brains can't necessarily function that way. God, that sounded super condescending, but like, it's not meant to be condescending because
Yeah.
I'm the same way, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've slowly become this way as well. I'll be whatever sitting through a meeting and my brain needs to be doing something else apparently, so I'll start like whatever looking at my phone, or so we're all kind of more and more built
Mm-hmm.
this way. So I don't know.
I mean, there are channels that
All
are
right.
super successful that are much longer form, like a ContraPoints or a Philosophy Tube or something, but those videos are such high production quality. Like Jared and I just
Right.
don't have the time or the money to like make that happen, nor would we really want to, probably, even if we had the resources. Um, I'd much rather be doing doing an episode every week than an episode every month or something like they do, even if it's more highly produced. I'd much rather be just exploring sort of what we're interested in, which brings me to the next question that people ask me actually all the time is how do we decide on topics? How do we decide what we're going to talk about?
So in terms of like for the longest time, it was mostly research I've already done, like dating
Mm-hmm.
all the way back to like graduate school to stuff I was working on as we were developing classes. So I mean, like that's how we decide upon content. Our favorite way to decide upon content of those was through course development. In fact, the channel itself started because of course development. It originally started because we were developing a class on a stateless society, basically a society or basically a course that explores, is there a possibility for society after the state? So not to confuse anyone, it's not about individuals seeking to create a state, like maybe certain like the KRG or something along those lines. It was can society exist without the state? And of course, it's an exploration of anarchism and all of its different layers. Anyway, as we decided we were going to research this topic, which we were not necessarily like, that was not what I got that was not my historical training, wasn't necessarily Nick's sociological training, but like now we are trained to research. So then eventually we did find our way into picking apart all of the different philosophies, the ideal and material properties of statelessness, both like pre-state and, of course, our predictions for post-state. Um, what we decided to do as we were going through that, sorry if I wasn't clear there, was to basically not, if this isn't like publishing our findings, but basically talking out our findings on this channel. That's essentially what
Mm-hmm.
that was. I don't know if you can kind of like frame that a little bit more clearly than I did, but
No, I mean, yeah, that,
that's
that was the very beginning of the podcast was us doing the research for that course. That's how we started it. I mean, our listeners, if they've listened to the whole thing, probably know, because I think we talked about this at the beginning, was that we really wanted to make a documentary film. We had students come to us frequently, actually, that was like, you guys should make a film. Like the way that you talk about stuff and the topics that you pick, like I think it'd be really entertaining and interesting. You should make a film. And we went down that path actually for a while. And then we were just like, dude, we like aren't experienced filmmakers. This is going to take a lot of work and resources, which we don't have. Before we go down this path, like, let's take a step back and what's the easiest thing we could do to sort of like put stuff out there, put content out there. And like the podcast was clearly the easy answer of like, it cost us nothing. I already had all the recording material or technology. Like we could just do it and see what happens. And like now here we are on our 100th episode. Right. And so that's how it started. Someday maybe we'll go back and make a film, who knows? But like, this has been a fun journey for sure. And that we're going to continue because we both ended up having fun and being passionate about it. And, that's it.
everybody and their brother has a podcast now. So we're just
Exactly.
part of the club. We're part of the club. The other
Exactly.
reason we started the channel, obviously, even before our research, now that I think about it, was also for some short videos that we could put into our online classes, for what few
Yeah,
online
that was the
classes we had.
origins of the like YouTube channel overall was so we could put videos in our classes. Like we teach online and we needed a place to host the videos of us lecturing and stuff. And then the podcast was kind of an extension of that, where we could do more content that we weren't using in class, which gave us the freedom to talk more freely about some topics. Because let's be honest, like we teach in a very specific way, and then we talk in the podcast in a very specific way, and there's a lot of overlap between the two. But there are certain things clearly we say on the podcast that I would never say in the middle of a lecture, like in the classroom, because it's just not academic, and there's not, this doesn't facilitate learning about a topic. Yeah.
So that's how we choose our topics. In
So
terms of like,
nowadays, and it began, like Jared said, where we would just go like, I have a lecture prepared on this because I already teach this topic. Let's do a podcast episode. Or I just researched this for our new class. Let's talk about that. Now we really are just following whatever we're interested in the moment, right? So it's like right now I'm researching nihilism because I'm just happen to be interested in that. And so I'm doing a super deep dive. So we have an ongoing series about nihilism, which we're going to come back to shortly. We're doing kind of a series on cyber anarchism because I've been looking into technology and the state and how could technology defeat the state. And so we have an ongoing series on that, right? Jared did an episode on the Garifuna because he went to Belize and became really interested in the locals there and their history and their story. And so he did research and we did an episode on that. So it's really just follows what we're interested in, learning more about. That's what we're doing topics on. And if any of the listeners come to us with an interesting topic that we want to talk about, like one of our listeners asked us about the education system and our thoughts on that. And so we did an episode on that because that was easy, right? There are certain taboo topics, which I'm sure our listeners have noticed that we refuse to touch, basically because we still have day jobs that we need to pay the bills. And so there are some things that we won't talk about for risk of putting our jobs in jeopardy. So it's just unfortunate that we won't do those things. You have something to add on that one?
Insert argument about the reality of First Amendment here, right? Like between YouTube and quote unquote the state, whether that state is the Fed or we're talking about specifically in our case a certain state within the United States. Like the fact that like there are certain things that if we don't approach them from the right political lens, right is actually probably the word I should be using here. Read into that what you would like. There might be a world of pain ahead, which is pretty sad. There's not very many of them, but there are a few. So again, read into that what you will. We're not completely. We do speak pretty freely on a lot of topics, but there's a few that apparently are still just taboo.
Also, like, there's just some things that, like, we aren't going to do an episode on because it would just take way too much time. Like, as an example, I think someone posted on I forget what episode it was, either socialism or something, or maybe the Russian Revolution. Like, was the famine in Russia the same as, like, the famine in North Korea or something like that? And I was like, dude, I don't know anything about North Korea and their history, so I'm not going to do an episode. They wanted an episode on it. And I'm not going to do an episode on that. Sorry. It's just not my area of expertise. And I'm not going to spend, dozens of hours researching that to do an episode on it. It's just not something I'm passionate about,
To do it well, right? Like a couple of people have asked us about events in perhaps like China, like in Chinese history. I'm not a Chinese historian. Most of my focus, and I've probably said it in other episodes, was either in the Middle East, Latin America, or to be blunt, the United States. Like those are kind of like my main areas. And then of course the history of social movement on a global scale. So then I can add in a little bit of sub-Saharan African history and maybe a little bit of Southeast Asian history, and I can add some other elements. But like, for example, yes, I can go through like the entire history of like the Mau Mau movement. Can I do the entire history of like Kenya? Probably not. So like there's just certain things that we don't have in our wheelhouse. And yes, we could probably research them, but if that research does not necessarily correlate back to the classroom for me, it's kind of like a cost-benefit analysis. Yep. Could I, as a trained historian, could I do the history of China? I absolutely could. Will it be applicable anywhere but one episode on YouTube or in the podcast? Probably not, for me, at least in what I'm teaching. So that's where I have to decide. I don't have the time to do this topic justice. Like the Boxer Rebellion, for example, is super interesting and might even cross over into some other thing. We just don't have the time or the background knowledge.
The same goes for like certain philosophy or philosophers, right? Yeah. Like we have a couple of episodes on Foucault's stuff because I needed it for class. and I'm pretty well versed in Foucault. But someone commented, I think, on one of those videos, like, I want to see you do an episode on Deleuze. And I'm like, I'm not going to become an expert on Deleuze just so I can do a YouTube episode, because I'm not going to use that elsewhere. And he's like, yes, I am passionate and would love to do that, but I'm just not going to spend dozens of hours at this point right now doing that. Maybe someday I will start reading some Deleuze and do an episode, but like, unless it's just not, I already know Foucault and do that for class. So I can do that easily for the podcast, but I'm not going to just pick up and become an expert on some philosopher that I've never read before just to do content. That's probably not going to happen. There might be a time when that will, but it's
We'll
not
make this
right
deal.
now.
Yeah, we'll make this deal. We get to 100K and then we'll start doing like research requests.
Exactly, 100%. Or if you support us on Patreon for a significant amount, I will do whatever you ask. Pick a topic and we will make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's where I am not dependent upon the state, at least for some of my livelihood.
I mean, that's the other thing, right? We both have full-time other jobs, more than full-time other jobs, actually. So, we do this on the side just for fun. So I'm not going to spend 100 hours a week researching stuff just to do an episode like, ContraPoints or Philosophy Tube or like whatever. Those people, like, their jobs now are doing, creating content. I would love for that to be the case. Like, I would love nothing more than for that to be the case, where Jared and I could travel the world making awesome content, but we're not there yet. Someday, if it happens, oh man, look out, because if we don't need day jobs and we could say whatever we want, like that, the channel will take a very interesting turn, which I would look forward to so much.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, plans for the future. What do we have coming up in the docket? I already said we have the series on nihilism ongoing, which I haven't abandoned. I'm actually reading through Max Stirner right now, because we're going to do an episode on ego and its own. We will have an episode on ego and its own. That's the next in our series on nihilism. So expect that in the next couple of weeks. Maybe a month or so. We will come back to the series on cyber anarchism. We've had a lot of requests actually surrounding that. So we will do some episodes there too. Those are the two series I think that I have going that I'm researching right now. There may be a movie or two injected in there as well if one comes up that Jared and I both like. What do you got planned?
Right now, like I said, I mean, there are some that are already prepared. We were kind of waiting to see if we could go in order, at least historically, back in the Myth is America series, but I don't know that we need to anymore. So obviously, civil rights, the long view, the actual like long view of civil rights, not the cute little like Dr. King gave a wonderful speech in D.C. and all of a sudden, boom, equality. That's what tends to happen when people frame civil rights, at least in a K through 12 classroom. We actually have a long view that we would argue dates back all the way to the first slave rebellion. So we do have an episode planned for that. That will definitely be a long form episode. In addition to like some of the newer content, quote unquote newer content. Obviously, I'm a historian, so all of my content is in the past or whatever. But like in terms of like newer content, we were going to explore the idea of surrogate activities, at least as a one far right terrorist, I guess, explain them for either. I mean, I'll call him what he was. But but we've also done the research to figure out that like these ideas are not original. Yeah. But we've realized that, like in his quote unquote grandiose manifesto that made it into the Washington Post, and I think it was the New York Times as well. Anyway, these ideas are actually not really wholly his, and we kind of already knew that. So we actually want to trace like the genealogy of these ideas of, again, surrogate activities and power processes, mainly just those two. Those are the only two intriguing things that we can like elicit, I think, from that manifesto, but we want to actually trace their origins and not necessarily give credit to this individual, if you all know who I'm talking about, for coming up with these ideas. So, which is interesting, actually. On the road trip, the other day, I passed by where he's being held. I passed by where he's being held. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, gave a little wave. Yeah. Anyway,
I've gone down that rabbit hole.
So anyway, that's what's been on my mind.
University of Michigan, I think they have a website with his archives. I've been down that rabbit hole. It's interesting. Anyways, yeah. So I mean, that's where we're at. A lot of long form stuff coming up. Probably a few shorties that will happen as we need stuff for class and etc. Then we have like this weird like middle tier also, where we do like, let's just knock out 30 minutes about this, or let's do 20 minutes on this topic of us just going back and forth. That isn't that like highly curated 7-minute video, and it's not the really researched hour or 2-hour video. It's like let's just do a shorty 20 minutes on this because we think that the conversation needs to be had and it isn't happening. You know what I mean? Which is really,
Yeah,
we're
most
willing to
recently
have
the
those
Confederate
conversations. There's
flag.
also some topics that, like, you mentioned second wave feminism. There's some topics that, like, while we give lectures on them in class, like, we don't, it's not up to us as two white dudes to, like, put content out about certain topics. Like, the other people can have those conversations. We don't need to be the voice in the room about stuff like that. So, like, I have to, because I have to give a lecture on it in class about something because I need it to fill in the holes of whatever I'm
Right.
talking about, like intersectionality as an example. I have to lecture on intersectionality because it's important in sociology. But, like, do we really need an episode of two white dudes talking about intersectionality? Like, the answer is no, we don't need that, right? So there's a lot of stuff that we both know and lecture and have done research on that, like, we're not going to make an episode on because it's just not necessary. Other people can lead those conversations. As two white guys, we don't need to be doing that.
100 episodes, man. What else you got?
We'll see how quick we get to 100 more. That took us about, I think the first episode was March of 2019. So we're like, whatever, almost 18 months in at this point. Which, actually, now that I think about it, yeah, that's a lot, actually. We knocked out a lot of content now that I think about it. It's pretty awesome. We'll see how fast.
Yeah, and it was
go.
all over the place in terms of history and philosophy and sociology. Yeah, so many different topics.
Which I actually like. I think it's detrimental to the growth of our program because, like, if we were just doing one very specific niche, I think it would probably grow more because we would attract those people attracted to that specific niche. But, like, it would just be boring for us. So I'd much rather be all over the place and, like, it grows as it grows. And, like, we've never been in it to, get 1 million views or something anyways. It's just for us to be entertained, and I am. So that's what's important. So, yeah, that's it. 100.
Absolutely.
Here's to another 100. Catch us online, revolutionandideology.com. If you're listening to this in your podcasting app, leave us a rating and a comment and help us find viewers. If you are watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you would like us to do an episode on. We may or may not do it, depending on what the topic is. If you really, really love what we're doing, follow us and support us on Patreon, patreon.com/revolutionandideology. I'm Nick.
I'm Jared.
Later.